The manuscript that shouldn't exist. The Voynich Manuscript is one of the most baffling objects ever discovered in human history. At first glance, it looks like an ordinary medieval book. Its pages are filled with handwritten text, carefully drawn illustrations, and structured layouts that suggest intention and intelligence. But the moment scholars tried to read it, everything fell apart. The language is completely unknown. The alphabet does not match any recorded writing system, and no one in over 6 centuries has been able to translate a single confirmed sentence. The manuscript surfaced publicly in 1912 when rare book dealer Wilfrid Voynich acquired it from a Jesuit collection. Carbon dating later placed its creation in the early 15th century, long before modern cryptography existed. That alone raised questions. The text follows consistent grammatical patterns with word repetition and sentence-like structures, yet it refuses to align with any known language. This rules out random scribbling, but it also defies every known method of encoding from the medieval world. What makes the manuscript even more unsettling are the illustrations. Strange plants that do not exist in nature. Astronomical diagrams that do not match known star charts. Nude human figures immersed in odd, interconnected systems of tubes and pools. These are not decorative sketches. They appear instructional, almost scientific, but their meaning remains locked away. Historians struggle with a simple question. How could someone in the 1400s create a text that behaves like real language, but belongs to none? The materials are authentic. The ink is period correct. The structure is deliberate. Yet its purpose is invisible. It is a book that checks every box for meaning, except the one that matters most: understanding. Centuries of failure. Once the Voynich Manuscript entered public awareness, it became an irresistible challenge. Some of the greatest minds in history believed it was only a matter of time before its meaning was uncovered. They were wrong. For centuries, every serious attempt to decode the manuscript ended the same way: confusion, disagreement, and eventual silence. Early efforts came from Renaissance scholars who assumed the text was written in a lost or heavily altered European language. They searched for Latin roots, Greek structures, and Hebrew patterns, but nothing held. Each theory collapsed under scrutiny. By the time cryptography evolved into a formal science, the manuscript had already gained a reputation as an unsolvable puzzle. During the 20th century, the challenge attracted professional codebreakers. Experts who had cracked military ciphers during World War II turned their attention to the Voynich Manuscript, confident it would fall like any other encrypted text. Instead, it resisted every known decryption method. Frequency analysis failed. Substitution models led nowhere. Statistical tests suggested the text had structure, but no cipher key could unlock it. As failures mounted, darker theories emerged. Some researchers declared the manuscript an elaborate hoax created to deceive collectors or nobles. Others suggested it was a meaningless imitation of language, carefully crafted to look real without saying anything at all. But those explanations created new problems. A hoax that complex would require extraordinary time, skill, and consistency, with no clear payoff. Eventually, frustration replaced curiosity. Scholars stopped trying. Grant funding dried up. The Voynich Manuscript was quietly labeled a dead end, not because it lacked mystery, but because it had defeated everyone who dared to understand it. Why AI was brought in. After centuries of human failure, the Voynich Manuscript reached an uncomfortable conclusion. The problem was no longer the book. It was us. Human researchers rely on intuition, historical context, and familiar linguistic patterns. But the manuscript offers none of those anchors. Every attempt to understand it was shaped by assumptions about how language should work, and those assumptions kept leading to dead ends. Artificial intelligence entered the picture not as a last hope, but as a different kind of mind. Unlike human scholars, AI does not search for meaning first. It searches for structure. It can process millions of symbol combinations, analyze spacing, repetition, and syntax-like behavior, and do so without caring whether the results make sense to us. That lack of bias was exactly what researchers needed. Modern AI models are trained to detect hidden patterns in massive datasets. When applied to the Voynich manuscript, they treated the text as pure data. Every character, word length, and positional rule was mapped and compared. The system looked for internal consistency, grammatical rules, and statistical signatures that would be invisible to the human eye. In hours, it accomplished what would take a human decades. This approach challenged a long-standing belief that the manuscript was either meaningless or deliberately deceptive. If the text followed measurable rules, then it was unlikely to be random. And if it wasn't random, then someone had encoded real information using a system we no longer recognize. AI was not asked to translate the manuscript. It was asked a simpler, more dangerous question. Does this text behave like a real language? The answer it began to return forced researchers to reconsider everything they thought they knew about the Voynich manuscript. The moment the algorithm spoke. When researchers finally fed the Voynich manuscript into advanced AI systems, they did not expect a breakthrough. Most assumed the results would confirm what many already believed, that the text was meaningless, or at best an elaborate illusion. Instead, the algorithm began producing outputs that forced everyone in the room to stop and look again. The AI did not read the manuscript the way humans do. It ignored the drawings, the myths, and the centuries of failed theories. It focused only on behavior, how symbols repeated, how certain words appeared only at the beginnings or ends of lines, how patterns shifted depending on page layout. Very quickly, something unsettling emerged. The text was not random, it followed rules. Clusters of symbols behaved like grammatical structures. Some sequences acted like prefixes and suffixes. Others appeared to function as modifiers, changing meaning depending on position. This was not how fake languages behave. This was how real systems of communication behave when stripped of cultural context. Even more disturbing was consistency. Across hundreds of pages, the same structural rules held firm. The chances of this level of order appearing by accident were astronomically low. Researchers watching the results described the moment as eerie, not because the AI translated the text, but because it proved the manuscript was saying something, even if we did not yet understand what. One researcher later admitted the room went quiet, not out of celebration, but discomfort. For centuries, humans had dismissed the manuscript as nonsense when it refused to explain itself. Now a machine had quietly demonstrated that the problem was not the text. It was our inability to listen in the right way. What AI claims the manuscript really is. Once the AI confirmed that the Voynich manuscript followed strict internal rules, researchers pushed the analysis further. The next goal was no longer to ask whether the text had meaning, but what kind of system it belonged to. The results did not point to a simple cipher or a known medieval code. Instead, the AI suggested something far more complex and unsettling. The algorithm found similarities between the manuscript structure and natural languages, not in vocabulary, but in behavior. Word lengths followed predictable distributions. Certain symbols appeared only in specific contexts, much like grammatical markers in real languages. Some sequences functioned like roots, while others modified or expanded them. This ruled out the long-standing hoax theory. Fake texts do not maintain this level of linguistic discipline across hundreds of pages. More intriguingly, the AI detected parallels to multiple language families at once. Not a direct match, but overlapping traits seen in Romance, Semitic, and even East Asian linguistic systems. This suggested the manuscript might represent a constructed or hybrid language, possibly designed to compress or obscure knowledge rather than express everyday speech. Another disturbing conclusion emerged. The structure implied the text was meant to be read by someone already trained to understand it. In other words, the manuscript was never intended for outsiders. It functioned more like a technical manual or encoded reference guide than a story or religious text. This reframed the entire mystery. The Voynich manuscript may not be unreadable because it is impossible to decode. It may be unreadable because it was never meant to be understood by anyone except a very small, very specific group. What this means for history. If the AI findings are even partially correct, the implications stretch far beyond a single manuscript. The Voynich manuscript would no longer be an isolated anomaly. It would be evidence that medieval knowledge was more advanced, more deliberate, and more secretive than modern history allows. That idea alone is enough to unsettle centuries of accepted narratives. Historians have long believed that complex systems of encoded knowledge emerged much later, alongside modern science and cryptography. Yet the manuscript suggests that someone in the early 1400s understood how to hide information within language, imagery, and structure at a level previously thought impossible for the time. This forces scholars to reconsider what was known, who knew it, and why it was hidden. More importantly, it reframes the role of artificial intelligence in historical research. AI is not replacing historians, but it is changing what questions can be asked. Instead of relying solely on translation and context, researchers can now analyze intent, structure, and design. Lost knowledge may no longer stay lost simply because humans cannot recognize it. The Voynich manuscript could be the first of many breakthroughs. Other undeciphered texts, forgotten symbols, and fragmented records may suddenly become readable, not in words but in patterns. This opens the door to rediscovering medical practices, scientific theories, or philosophical systems that vanished without explanation. But this also raises an uncomfortable possibility. If history has been incomplete not because of destruction, but because of concealment, then much of what we think we know may be only a surface layer. The manuscript hints that the past may still be watching, waiting for the right kind of intelligence to finally understand it. The questions we're still afraid to ask. Even with AI uncovering structure and intent, the Voynich manuscript refuses to fully surrender its secrets. In fact, the more researchers learn, the more disturbing the unanswered questions become. Progress has not brought closure. It has exposed how little we truly understand. The most unsettling question remains the simplest. Who created this manuscript and for what purpose? No author has ever been definitively linked to it. No historical record mentions its creation. If it contains protected knowledge, as the evidence suggests, then the author either feared persecution or understood the danger of misuse. Both possibilities point to a world far more complex than we imagine. Another question follows closely behind. Who was meant to read it? The manuscript appears deliberately inaccessible to outsiders, implying a closed group trained to understand its system. Was this knowledge passed orally? Was it reserved for elites, healers, or secret societies? And if so, what happened to them? Then there is the question of timing. Why does this manuscript begin to make sense now? Why do its patterns reveal themselves only when analyzed by a machine centuries removed from its creation? Some researchers find this coincidence unsettling. It suggests the text was designed to outlast its own era, waiting for a future intelligence capable of understanding it. Perhaps the most uncomfortable thought is this. If the Voynich manuscript was meant to hide knowledge, and AI is now uncovering it, are we prepared for what it might eventually reveal? Or have we just crossed a line we were never meant to approach? For centuries, the Voynich manuscript was silent. Now it's speaking through a machine that never sleeps and never forgets. If this book was hiding knowledge from humanity, do you think we were meant to find it now? Drop your theory in the comments, and if you want more mysteries where technology collides with the unknown, like, subscribe and stay curious.